Welcome to University Theater's How to Theater series. My name is Laura Parker. I am the costume shop manager and costume designer here at NC State University Theater. And we are going to be going through blood and gore and wounds and all of those really fun things that you might find that comes in handy for your Halloween costumes this year. Just as a content warning, the title is kind of self-explanatory, but we will be dealing with false blood. We will be dealing with false bruises, with false cuts, and gashes and that sort of thing. So just as a content warning, we will be looking at this stuff in detail. We will not be looking at any images of actual blood and gore and cuts and wounds, but we will be demonstrating how to mimic those effects with makeup. So that is our official content warning. Our How to Theater series is our backstage series on how we create theater. So you see all the actors on stage doing their thing when our shows are in production, but there are a plethora of people working backstage to make all of that magic happen. So we are happy to be able to virtually open our doors and share all of our information, our tips, our tricks, and our experiences with the community at large. So thank you so much for joining us. Again, content warning, we are going to be going over blood and gore and wounds. Everything that you see today will be fake, but we will be going over those tips and tricks. So just throwing that out there. Okay, so the first thing that people ask me about is, how do you make stage blood? And there are a plethora of recipes out there on the internet. If you Google stage blood recipes, you'll come up with 1,000 different recipes. Everybody has their own version. I'm going to share with you my personal versions that we have developed over the years here at University Theater. We do a lot of murder mysteries in the summertime, so we have had a lot of blood on our stage. And I just want to kind of throw this out there. If you do Google recipes, there are a lot of recipes that include peanut butter, because peanut butter is a really good thickening agent. If you get the crunchy peanut butter, it has a lot of texture. Personally, I do not like to use peanut butter in blood that I'm making for the stage for a couple of reasons. One, it is a food product. It can attract ants and bugs and that sort of thing. But more importantly, so many people have peanut allergies now. And even if you kind of run it through the cast and crew, verifying that nobody has a peanut allergy, you never know if they have one that they don't know that they have. And also you run the risk of an audience member who is really, really sensitive to peanut or peanut dust accidentally picking up some of that peanut butter from the stage blood, especially if it's a really close and intimate stage. So personally, I do not advise using peanut butter in your blood recipes. There are other thickening agents. There are other ways to create texture if you need a really textured blood. But I'm just going to throw that out there. So that's my personal experience. So when I'm creating blood for the stage, I will make 2 different recipes depending on the application of the blood. You need to talk with your director, talk with your fight choreographer about what the blood is going to be doing. If the blood is going to be kind of from the neck up, or there is a risk of ingestion, you want to make sure that your blood is non-toxic and your blood is edible, because you don't want it to get in somebody's mouth and have it unintentionally hurt them. If it's something from the waist down, we can look at either a edible version, or we can look at the version that I prefer, which is a soap-based version, which is really, really washable. And that's one of the things that me as a costumer, this is always my first question, like, okay, how much blood are we doing? And where's it gonna get? And how do I protect my costumes that we have spent so much time working on here in the shop? So I've developed this washable version that works really, really well. It washes out in a flash, but it is not edible, so not for the neck up. So for my washable blood, my base is going to be dish detergent. So I like to use it's usually a pomegranate and it smells good, but I like to use the pink dish detergent because it already has some color in it. So our dish detergent is our base. And what we're going to do is we're going to take that dish detergent, we're going to put it in a saucepan, something that is dedicated purely to crafting or to paint or to dyes or whatever, not something that you're going to ever eat out of again. Going to put it in a saucepan on the stove on a very, very low heat, and you're going to start to get some heat into that soap. I'm not going to give you amounts because amounts really do vary depending on how much blood you need to make. The majority of this soap-based blood is going to be soap. So if you figure that you're going to need about a cup and a half, 2 cups of blood for the weekend or for the run, you probably want to put in a couple of cups of soap. If you're going to need more soap. If you're going to need less soap. I typically am not going to make a less than a cup of blood. The nice thing about the soap version is that it stays around for a really long time. I have some back in my craft room here that's been around for a couple of years, and it's still fine. It's still perfectly usable. So you can make a big batch, especially if you know you're going to be using it a lot over like the next 6 months or the next year. So you're going to start with your soap. You're going to put that in a saucepan on low heat on your stove. The next thing that you're going to need is your coloring agents. And since we want this to be our washable blood, we're not going to use food coloring, which is a typical coloring agent for stage blood, because food coloring stains really, really badly. If you think back when you made holiday cookies over the holidays and you're rolling those out, you got green and red or blue all over your hands and it stayed there for days. We don't want that in our washable stage blood. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually use washable, non-toxic children's paint. And it is, even though it's non-toxic, you don't eat it. This is why this is the non-edible blood. But because it is non-toxic, designed for children, it's okay when it gets on the skin, as long as you wash it off relatively quickly. So I use this washable children's paint in red. Is going to be your primary coloring agent, but blood isn't just red, right? This red is really, really bright and vibrant, and this would look really, really fake on stage, and that is typically not the look that we're going for. Oh, thank you, Mia. I'm sorry, I forgot to say, if you have any questions, drop them in the chat, drop them in the Q&A. Mia is on tap to read out those questions to me because I am obviously very bad at multitasking. So please ask questions because blood and gore can be really confusing. So I'm gonna put some of my red children's paint in with my soap that's simmering away on my stove. But then I'm gonna add in a few drops of blue. And what this blue does is that it's going to cool down that red, and it's going to bring it down to a more natural, fresh blood color. You can also add in a little black, you can add in a little brown, kind of depending on the color that you are looking for. But you don't want to do just pure red because that's going to look really, really unnatural, unless of course that is the look that you're going for. And this is the conversation that you have with your director or with the rest of the production team. But you want to add in some blue to bring that color down a little bit. And now why are we simmering this on the stove? Why are we adding in this heat element? Because the soap, the viscosity of the soap is not really a good viscosity for stage blood. It's a little runny. You can see it's kind of running all over the place there. It's not very thick. So what we need to do is we need to add a thickening agent to our blood concoction here. And so that's where we're going to add in cornstarch. Cornstarch is a natural thickening agent. You use this to make like gravy and stuff like that in the kitchen. So it is non-toxic, is perfectly safe. You're going to sprinkle this into your soap and paint mixture to thicken it up. And again, I'm not giving you quantities because it really does depend a lot on how much blood you're making. It's kind of it's an art more than a science. You're going to use your best judgment, but go ahead and sprinkle in. I'd say for 2 cups of soap, I'd probably put in almost a full 1/4 cup of cornstarch. So it's a good bit, and it's going to thicken that up really, really, really nicely. The other thing that you can use as a thickening agent and also as a coloring agent in both of these blood recipes is cocoa powder. Cocoa powder adds in a little bit of thickness, a little bit of viscosity to your blood mixture. And it's also going to, again, tone that red down. So it's going to bring that red down to a more natural blood color. So when we're thinking about how we're pulling all of these mixtures together, we really do need to keep in mind what the overall effect we are looking for. And that is where your research is going to come in handy. And that is where the research can honestly get a little upsetting. You want to look at images of both special effects, blood, makeup effects, and also actual images of real blood, because that's the way that we're going to get to know what it looks like at various stages within a wound. So it can be really upsetting and it can be really disturbing. So if that's something that makes you uncomfortable, you need to have a conversation with your director or with the production staff about how you can safely navigate that to make sure that you feel safe and you can still do your job. So that I'm just going to throw that out there. So you're going to simmer all of those ingredients together. You're going to play with that mixture of paint and soap and cornstarch to get a good viscosity. And this is a batch of soap-based blood that I made last night. I made this a little on the red side because I'm using this for a Halloween costume, and I wanted it to be really, really bright. But you can see, I'm dip my fingers in here. You can see that has a little bit of stickiness to it. It has a little bit of viscosity to it. And then when you kind of spread it around, this has a really nice, vibrant blue red that is going to be really appropriate for my 1970s Hammer vampire costume that I'm personally pulling together. So that is the washable stage blood. And because it is that paint-based, because it is the washable children's paint, it's going to wash out of most everything really, really easily. But you still want to test it if you are doing something that has a lot of white or a lot of light colors in it. You're going to want to make sure that you run a test on something that's not going to be visible on stage prior to actually using this on stage, because it will it may stain some things. Kind of the other trick that I've learned through historic costuming actually is if your garment that you're putting on stage that has to have stage blood on it, if your garment is capable of being starched, go ahead and starch that garment, because the starch is going to actually act as a protective layer on top of your garment, and the blood will get on the starch as opposed to soaking into the fibers of the garment, and it will wash out a lot easier. So if you can starch something, go ahead and starch it, and you'll protect your costume much more effectively.
Laura,
All right. Yeah.
two questions for you. When you're working with your cornstarch, does that need to come to a boil to activate the way it does in puddings and that kind of thing?
Yes, it does. You want to get that up to a nice rolling boil. Thank you.
Okay. And then my second question, in terms of fibers in fabrics, are there particular types of materials that you know right offhand are challenging to use with blood, rather than color, like, still hard to work with? Is it wool? Is it polyester, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, typically, if you're going to be using a garment on stage with blood, you're going to want the garment to be washable immediately. You don't want to have to wait to take it to the dry cleaner. You don't want the expense of it going to the dry cleaner every night. So wools, silks, velvets are probably not going to be great for something that's going to get a lot of blood on it. Some polyester satins can hold up really, really well to a washing. Cottons, linens, cottons and linens are generally fine. The trick is you're going to want to go ahead and pre-wash that fabric before you actually make the costume, so that it will have already pre-shrunk. It will already be exactly what it wants to be once you make it, and then you can throw it into the wash really quickly and really effectively. But things like woolens and things like silks that require more delicate care are going to be a less appropriate fabric choice if you're going to be using a lot of blood. You can hand wash some of those things, but it's not as effective a way to get all of the soap and all of the paint out. So thank you for asking that, Mia. All right, so what if your blood is going to be on the neck, the face, up? What if your blood is going to be ingested? That is when you're going to go to a really, really classic recipe that has a corn syrup base. And so you can get this in the baking aisle at the grocery store. You want to make sure that you are getting either a light corn syrup or a light amber corn syrup. The dark corn syrups that look more like molasses are not going to take the color that you want it to take. And what's great about corn syrup is that it already has that kind of bloody viscosity to it. You don't need to add a lot of thickening agent to it. You might want to, depending on your application, but typically kind of right out of the bottle, the corn syrup is going to act as your base. When you're mixing this stuff up, you do not need to, you don't need to boil it, you don't need to heat it because we're not adding any cornstarch to this. So you can just do this right in a regular old mixing bowl. So you've got your corn syrup. The thing about the corn syrup is that A, it's sticky. I've already got stickiness on my hands just by holding this bottle. And B, because it is a sugar base, it will attract ants and it will attract bugs. So you want to make sure that the bottle is very clean. You want to make sure that everything is put away in airtight containers so that you don't attract any sort of vermin into your costume shop or into your dressing rooms. So with the corn syrup bases, we're going to make sure that everything that we put in this is edible, because this is something that we want to make sure that if it gets in the mouth, if it gets in the nose, that it's something that is it's not going to harm ourselves or it's not going to harm our actor. So typically with the corn syrup, you're going to use food coloring as your coloring agent. And again, just like with the paint-based blood recipe, we're not just going to use red, we're also going to use other colors to add in a little bit of coolness to our red. So this is a really kind of highly concentrated food coloring. I got this at Michael's, I think, in the baking aisle. And what's great about Halloween season is that you can get more alternative food colorings just at the grocery store. So here I've got a black and a purple. And I was able to just use the red, the black, and the purple to make my new batch of corn syrup based blood last night. You can also, again, throw in your cocoa powder. A, it makes it taste chocolatey, so, yay. But B, it also adds a little bit of viscosity if you need a little bit of extra thickness, and it tones down that really, really bright red that you get with the red food coloring. And so the same thing as with the soap-based blood, you're going to make about as much as you need. This stuff, the corn syrup will last quite a while, but again, it's going to attract bugs, it's going to attract insects if it's left out. So you don't want to make much more than you actually need. So, if you need a cup and a half, measure that out into your mixing bowl. And then when you're mixing in your food coloring, you don't need a lot. These are highly concentrated little bits of pigment. So start off small, start off with 2 or 3 drops of the red and maybe a drop of the blue or a drop of the purple, a drop of the black to tone it down. Mix that up and then add in colors as you see fit to get the color that you need. It's like mixing paint. So that is that. And what's great about the corn syrup base is that it is edible. So it's not only appropriate for anything that's kind of going across the face. If you need a smear of blood kind of going across the face, it's good for that. But we can also use it if you're doing vampire or if you're doing monster effects. We can actually take this corn syrup based blood and use it to make blood capsules that the actor can hold in their mouth, bite down on, and like spit out blood. So because this is completely edible, this is perfectly safe to do that. And we're going to go through how to do that here momentarily. And so I've got 2 different jars of blood. These are both based off of the same mixture. So these are corn syrup, food coloring, and a little bit of cocoa powder. But the difference here is that one is pretty it's got a really high viscosity level. It's really, really thick. And this is a lot more watery. And so on this one, I added a lot of water to really water it down for what I'm going to show you with the capsules and with these little pipettes, so that it moves a little easier through the pipette. So you're going to want to make sure that you're finding the viscosity that is appropriate for your application. If you're applying it directly to the skin, if you're doing a big smear of blood on an actor, the thicker viscosity is going to work much better for that. If you are using if you're ingesting it, or if you're using the capsules, if you're doing kind of a spurt of blood with the pipettes, a thinner viscosity is going to work really, really good for that. All right.
This is a question from Mohammed.
Mm-hmm.
Do you add the paint while the mixture is being heated or after it's cooled down?
I've done it both ways, and it doesn't seem to affect the color either way. So it's personal preference, I guess.
Does the paint in your pan make your pan not usable for other things?
Yes, yes. So if you're putting the paint directly into the pan, you're going to want to get a pan that you are dedicating purely to crafts. So go to Goodwill or a thrift shop, buy just a cheap old saucepan that you can use solely for paints and dyes and that sort of thing. If you do not have that, then yes, go ahead and mix up your soap and your cocoa powder and your cornstarch, get that heated up to a rolling boil, and then you can pour that into a disposable bowl and then mix in your pigments. All right, so the first thing that we think about when we're using stage blood is we talk a lot about trying to get they talk about making either what's called a strawberry or a squib. And so these are going to be little bags of blood that the actor may palm or may be hidden somewhere inside their costume that's going to break on impact. So this is an impact-based application of the blood. And this is to mimic actually getting shot or stabbed or a wound or that sort of thing. So here I am going to use this is my soap-based blood. And I have a little, see if I can zoom. Oh, there we go. That's so much better. There we go. This is just a plastic sandwich baggie. And so when you're buying your sandwich baggies for these strawberries, for these squibs, you want to make sure that you're buying legit the cheapest one that they have, because we want this plastic to be really, really thin and easy to break. And so what we're going to do, to get the blood from the jar into the plastic baggie, I like to use just a little syringe. You can get these at the drugstore. They're pretty cheap, but they will suck up the blood really, really easily. And it's easy to measure how large your squibs are because these have measurements directly on the syringe. And so I'm just going to reach in, pour out some blood. You can also do this with just a cup. You could do this with, you could just pour it in, but I like the syringe because it's a little easier to work with. It's a little less messy. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take our bag and we're going to inject this blood down into a corner of the bag. So we want to get it all down into one corner, like so. I'm going to put a little more in there. So I'll do 2 full syringes for this little strawberry, like so. All right, and so once you have all of your blood in the corner of your bag, now we need to tie this up. And to do that, you're going to want to get all of the blood as far down into that corner as possible. And now we're going to take the bag and we're gonna twist. And we're gonna twist this really, really tight. We wanna get a lot of tension on this little squid. You can see why it's often referred to as a strawberry, because it ends up looking like a little plastic strawberry. You wanna get a lot of tightness and a lot of tension on this so that it's easier to break. The tighter that tension is, the easier it is to break. If it's a little loose, it's going to be harder for the actor to activate. So you want to get that as tight as possible without actually bursting it as you're making it. And then you're just going to carefully tie that bag and pull the knot down so that it is up flush against our little strawberry. So you can see I've got my little strawberry here. I've got my little knot here. You want to make sure that knot is nice and tight. And it's just it's a fine balance between making sure it's tight and not actually breaking it while you're making it. And then we can use our scissors and we can just trim off that edge right there. So that is going to be one way to apply blood. I'm going to show you another way, and then I'll show you how these things explode. That way my hands are only getting messy once. All right, so we've got our strawberry. If you want a more focused stream of blood, this is going to come out in kind of an explosion of blood. If you want a stream of blood, you can actually use these, there we go, these little pipettes. And these are actually used by bakers to put very, very fine amounts of frosting or gel coloring on like cupcakes and cakes and that sort of thing. So you can get these from baking supply stores. I got a big old bag of these on Amazon for like $5 or something. They're very inexpensive. But these are going to act in a similar way as to our syringe, or like when you drink out of a straw and you kind of suck it up by putting the suction up at the top of the straw. This is going to act the same way. So here, I'm going to use my corn syrup based blood, and I'm going to use the more liquefied version of this. The thicker ones don't really suck up into the pipettes very, very easily. So we want a thinner viscosity for a stream of blood. So let me open this up here. And for these, all we're going to do is we're going to squeeze all the air out of this pipette as much as possible and kind of hold that down. And then once the straw is in the blood mixture, we're going to release the pressure on that, and that's going to suck up the blood into the pipette. And if it doesn't get filled the first time, you can, see how I show this. You can kind of squeeze the air out of this empty space here. So if you just squeeze down there, you're not going to lose too much of the blood that you've already got in there. And go in. This is not a neat job, y'all. Blood is messy. And we're going to fill that up a little more. There we go. So now we have a filled pipette here. And these have these really long kind of straws on them. You can cut the straw relatively short. You don't want to cut it all the way down, or else it's going to kind of spill out. But we can cut this so it just has a little bit of a straw right there. And now that, I've got blood all over my working area here. Now that is something that an actor can very easily hold in the palm of their hand and apply pressure to that pipette and squirt the blood out in a stream. Or conversely, it can be attached to an actor using medical tape. If you put pressure on that, the blood is going to stream out in the direction that that little straw is facing. So as an example, so if I palm this and apply pressure, I've got a really lovely squirt of blood right there. And then the actor just has to figure out how to dispose of that pipette somewhere inconspicuous on stage. So the pipettes are fun. This is our little strawberry squib. I'm hoping this will not explode up and get all over my camera here. So same thing with that. You want to make sure that the actor is palming it. These do tend to have kind of a point on them at the corner of the bag, so you can kind of direct them a little bit, but this is really going to be more of a sploosh as opposed to a stream. And these do tend to be a little harder to break. I will make a bunch of these and let the actor practice with them before they actually have to use them on stage. But we get that really kind of lovely splooch of blood. And then this tends to be thicker and it sticks a little easier. So if you want them to kind of be able to spread it around, that thicker viscosity is going to work really well. So it does take practice like any other stage combat, stage activity. It takes a lot of practice to figure out how to learn and how to work with this stuff. So make sure that you're giving yourself or your actors enough time to really work with that stuff. All right, so the last thing I want to show you before we move past blood and we start to get into some gore and some wounds are these little blood capsules. And so if you go to, there are lots of Halloween stores out there right now. If you go to any Halloween store, if you go to any kind of special effects makeup store, they're going to have blood capsules. And those blood capsules are going to be really, really expensive. But we can make these ourselves. You can purchase a bag of, here we go, a bag of empty gelatin capsules very, very inexpensively. I got 500 of these for I think $5 or $6. And this would be all the capsules that you could possibly need for a very, very long time. And so these come apart. They're in two pieces. Oh, it's really hard to see with the, since they're clear. But they come apart. They're in two pieces. I'm going to use the more liquid of my edible blood. I'm going to, this is where the syringe comes in really handy, y'all, because these little capsules can be tricksy to use. And now all we're going to do is we're going to take our teeny tiny little capsule. There we go, teeny tiny little capsule. And we're just going to inject the blood into the capsule and fill it up as far as we can. And then you take the other side and pop it on, and there's a little rib at the top, and that's going to click. So now we have a blood capsule that the actor can put in their mouth and then bite down on, and blood will come spurting out of their mouth. If you want the blood to be a little more directional, you can, instead of just kind of a splooge of blood coming out, you can take a needle and pop a hole into one end of the capsule. And you just want to do like a little pinhole there. It's not going to drip out too badly, but if they position the hole so that it is facing forward, they're going to get kind of a nice stream of blood coming out. The biggest trick with these little capsules is if you make them at home with these gelatin capsules, the gelatin tends to melt very, very quickly. So you can't make these up very far in advance or they are going to kind of collapse on themselves. So you really should have a dedicated person ready to make the capsule and hand it over to the actor right before they go on stage. The ones that you purchase at the Halloween stores, they do tend to last a lot longer, but these are much more inexpensive. So you have to kind of find your balance, but I like using these. I think they're really great and you can make a whole bunch up really, really cheaply.
Laura, have you ever used the actual gelatin, the soft gel capsules?
Yeah, these are gelatin.
No, I'm talking about the squishy ones.
Oh no.
I bought a cheap container of like vitamin E capsules, and because they're vitamins and they're usable, if you have a syringe with a needle on it, you can suck out the vitamin E and shoot in your blood, and then they're squishy and they have that little hole in it, but they tend to hold up a little better because the gel is thick.
Oh, okay. I will try that. Thank you, Mia.
They tend to be smaller, so sometimes you have to use multiples, but they do tend to last a little bit longer than
Okay.
the rigid gelatin.
Thank you.
Fun with blood and gore.
Yeah, and see, that's a great example, y'all, of sharing is caring. There's far too much information out there for any of us to know everything about everything. So talk to your friends, talk to your colleagues, and learn new tricks. I'm learning new tricks all the time, literally all the time. Okay, so now we are going to move on to some wounds. And first wound I'm going to show you, actually I'm going to show you a bruise first, because bruises are things that actors tend to have to do quite a bit for stage. It is a very, very common wound technique that shows up a lot in plays. So we're going to talk about the anatomy of a bruise. So what you're going to need for a bruise is you're going to want to get what's called a bruise wheel. And a bruise wheel is this little makeup palette, and it has 4 different colors. Some of them have more colors, but 4 is kind of your basic. A really bright red, a really dark maroon, a yellow, and kind of a purpley black. You can also bring in some green. Green can come in really, really handy. And then you can also bring in just a lighter brown as well. But you can get a good bruise out of just your basic 4-color bruise wheel. And so the reason why we need 4 colors is if you think about how a bruise works. I would assume that most of us have been bruised at some point in our lifetime. And if you think about kind of the timeline, the lifeline of a bruise is going to change color, and it's going to modify on almost like a day-to-day basis. So when a bruise is like really new and fresh, it's going to have a lot of redness to it. It's going to be really, really kind of bright and vibrant red. And then as the bruise heals, we're going to see a lot more yellows, a lot more purples, some darkness as that blood heals underneath the skin. And so as we're kind of thinking about it from a stage perspective, as we're designing these bruises, we need to think about where in the life of the bruise the actor is. If it's a fresh bruise, you're going to want to have something that's a little more red. If it's an older bruise, you're going to want something that has a little more yellow, a little more purple in it. And this is where your research is going to come in handy. If you are unlucky enough to get bruised, I got a horrific bruise doing a show 3 or 4 years ago that I actually took pictures of, and I use it as research about how a large bruise ages over time. And so that's my personal research. I actually have pictures of this giant bruise. But you can also go online. You can do lots of research about how bruises age over time. So you want to make sure that you're choosing kind of a bruise design that is appropriate for your character. If the bruise is fresh, it's going to look one way. If the bruise is old, it's going to look another way. And so let's see here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. There we go. Boop, 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 boop. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my bruise wheel here, and I am going to start with the red. And you're going to use a makeup sponge, and we're also going to use some brushes to add some color onto our skin. And with this, with bruising, because bruises are not kind of solid, they tend to have a lot of texture to them. I like to take these kind of disposable little latex sponges and just cut them up a little bit at the end. And that's going to add some texture as I apply the makeup. The other thing that's going to come in really, really handy are these stipple sponges. And these are really kind of coarse, chunky sponges, and they come in different sizes. So this little one has kind of larger holes, and this little one has smaller holes. And this is going to allow us to add some texture to our bruise. So you don't want your bruise to just kind of look like a solid mass. It's going to have some depth, it's going to have some texture, it's going to have some color. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this kind of textured little sponge. I'm going to go in with my red. And I am going to add my base. So my base is going to be this red. I'm going to make this a relatively recent bruise, I think. And so you want the concentration to be of color to be kind of primarily in the center, and then it's going to radiate out. Because if you think about how the blood vessels break underneath the skin, there tends to be the point of impact, and then those blood vessels kind of break and burst, radiating out from that center point of impact. So you've got kind of that sensitive spot in the middle, but then you have a lot of discoloration throughout the body of the bruise. All right, so once I've got my base layered in there, now I'm going to go in with a little bit of this purple. I'm going to very lightly dab in a little more texture here. So you can see that's already pulling out some color there. I'm going to radiate that out a little bit more. Now I'm going to go in with my yellow. And the yellow will add a little bit of depth on the interior of the bruise, but that is going to add a little more on the outside of the bruise as well. So here, I'm going to kind of dab that out. Work that out. And let's see. I'm going to use my little stipple sponge here. Actually add in a little black just to give it a little bit of depth. And now I'm going to go in with my paintbrush with the purple and start to kind of trace out the outline of this bruise here. And so this looks a little clunky right now, but we're going to blend and we're going to shade this in to kind of give it a little more depth and a little more texture. Going with some yellow. So it really is about just kind of figuring out where that center is and radiating out your color and finding that balance of yellows and purples and reds. And sometimes kind of putting bruises on can be really, really fast. This may be something that you have to do on a quick change, so you will not have the opportunity to kind of layer in a lot of color and make it look like super gross. And then sometimes you really do have the opportunity to go in and do some finer detailed work. So if you really don't have a chance to add in too much depth to it, you're just going to want to make sure that you're getting in your reds and your purples and your yellows in an appropriate pattern and doing that really, really fast. But if you have the chance to kind of blend everything out, you can do some really kind of fun effects with some veining and spotting on the inside of the bruise as well. Add some spotting there. Oops. There we go. Oh, that's disgusting. That looks gross. That's amazing. I love it. So again, just like with the blood, bruises are not one color. There are lots of colors. And the trick is just to find that balance of texture for the age of your bruise. I'm going with a little bit more red. So there we go. That's disgusting. All right, so that's a basic bruise. Like I said, bruises can be lots of sizes, it can be lots of shapes. You're going to want to do your research to make sure that the bruising is appropriate for the character and appropriate for kind of the age of the bruise where it's at. But the trick is to kind of get that central color and then get that radiation out. Any questions on bruises?
How would you make sure that bruise lasts all night long?
Thank you for asking that, Mia. I'm very scatterbrained today. So to make sure that the bruise lasts all night long, you're going to use your neutral set powder. So we've got just a neutral invisible powder. We'll go in with our powder puff, our brush, and we're just going to set that bruise using our powder. And then you can also go in if it's someplace that's going to take a lot of abuse, if it's on the hand, or if it's on something that you're doing a lot of stage combat and you think that you need a little bit of extra protection, you can go in with a setting spray as well, just a makeup setting spray to make sure that that is set. Thank you for asking that, Mia. I am apparently very scattered today.
Yeah. So if we were doing this for a Halloween party and I don't have setting spray, would the cornstarch work?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, cornstarch. Cornstarch is fine and it tends to dry invisible. You could use something like baby powder, but that'll tend to kind of mute things out. But yeah, cornstarch would be a great alternative. All right. So now that we're bruised, now we're going to go over how to do a gash. So let's say I wanted to do a cut across the back of my hand here. I have so much makeup on my hands, y'all. So much makeup on my hands. So what we're going to use for this, we're going to use a couple of different tools and a couple of different products to mimic that gash. So we're still going to keep out our bruise wheel because that's going to come in handy. We're also going to want to have a foundation that matches our skin tone as to wherever we're going to be putting that gash. I tend to like to put in some shadow as well. And then let's see, the black comes in really, really handy as well. You'll want your little stipple sponges to add some texture. And you'll want some brushes to start adding in some blood and some texture as well. But the big things that you may not already have in your makeup kit is you're going to need some nose and scar wax. So this is just it's wax. You can get it in various skin tones to match your skin. So you've got wax. And then we're also going to want some spirit gum. And with the spirit gum, you're also going to want spirit gum remover because spirit gum does not come off of your skin without the actual spirit gum remover. It is a very, very sticky substance. And then you'll want some sort of a modeling tool. You can use, these are just little sculpting spatulas that I got at Michael's. You can use little scoops. You can use toothpicks, anything that's going to give you kind of a sharp edge that you can use to create the gash. And so what we're going to do first is we're going to figure out where we want this gash to live on our hand. And so I think I'm going to do it kind of right across the top of the hand here. And I'm going to take the spirit gum and I am going to paint a thin layer of spirit gum where I want that gash to live. And the reason why we have to do this is that the wax is not going to apply itself, or it's not going to stick to your skin without a little bit of spirit gum to hold it in place. So we're just going to apply that there. You gotta wait about a minute or so for the spirit gum to get tacky. But while that's getting tacky, now we can take out our wax. And so I'm just going to take out a hunk of wax here. And you scoop it out, and you're going to kind of mold it, get it warm with your hands. I think I want a little more than that. There we go. Get that nice and warm. And so when we're applying the wax, to do a cut, I'm typically going to just roll it out like you made snakes in elementary school with modeling clay. Roll it out. And the wax is pretty sticky to work with. And so this is actually where the spirit gum remover, you can also use makeup remover as well, comes in handy. As we are applying this wax, yeah, it's pretty sticky, where we want our cut to be, like that. Now, the next thing that we need to do is we need to kind of feather out all of these edges so that it looks like our skin is absorbing this piece of wax. And that's where the spirit gum remover or some makeup remover is going to come in handy. You can also use Vaseline, petroleum jelly to just kind of help feather and texture that out. And you want to try to get as smooth an edge as possible so that it really blends in with your skin. I'm not doing a great job of that today. And the smoother you can get this edge, the more natural and disgusting this is going to look. All right, and you can see that with the spirit gum, I kind of missed this top spot here, so it's kind of pulling away from the skin a little bit. But where the spirit gum and the wax have attached to each other, the wax is actually moving with the skin really, really nicely. All right, so once you have your wax in place, now you're going to want to go ahead and use a little bit of powder. You can also use that cornstarch if you don't have powder. And we're just going to brush on top of this wax just a little bit so that our foundation has some place to stick to. Just want to give it a little bit of extra help with that. All right, and now I'm going to go in with my foundation. And I like to use the cream-based foundations for this just because it's going to help us blend a little easier. So I'm going to go in with my foundation, and I am going to paint or dab on that foundation on top of this wax and blend that into the rest of my hand. All right, and from here, now we can go ahead and we can start adding some color to this. So I think what I'm going to start with is just using a little bit of this brown and just adding a little bit of texture on top of this wound. I'm just going to use my little stipple sponge. I'm going to add some texture here. And now I'm going to do the same with my red. Make this look nice and gory. I'm going to blend that out a little bit. Okay, and the same thing as with our bruise. I want to add some yellow here on the edges. It's going to mimic that irritation, those broken blood vessels around a wound. And dab that out, blend that in. See, once we kind of get this color on, those wax edges blend in pretty nicely too. Now I think I'm going to go in with a little bit of purple right here across the top. This is going to be where I'm going to actually mark my wound. Going with a little of the foundation, kind of blend that out a little bit. So again, it is about doing your research, figuring out what the wound actually would look like, and then, oops, that was way too dark. And then blending it out. So once you've got your wound base blended out to where you are comfortable, now we can actually add the gash. And so we've got this big old ridge of wax kind of going across the top of our hand here. This is where our tool is going to come in handy. I'm going to take this tool and I am going to just cut into this wax like so. And typically you can go in, open it up a little bit so that we have a nice raw open edge. That. And now what we need to do is we need to add color on the inside. So this is where our little paintbrushes are going to come in handy. First, I'm going to go in with my red. I'm going to get as much color on the inside of this wound as I can. Oops, sorry, y'all. I'm trying to watch in the Zoom, make sure I don't go off camera. All right, once you have your red base in there, now you want to go in with your darker maroon, kind of highlight the top of that gash a little bit. And then let's just add a little bit of black there as well. Let's give that a little bit of a deeper color. Yeah, I like that. Looks a little burned. That's fun. All right, so once you have your wound looking the way that you want it to look, the last thing that we can do to make this look really disgusting and more realistic is that we can add some of our fake blood into this wound. So I'm going to use, not that one, I'm going to use the thicker corn syrup based blood because I like the color of that a little better for this application. I'm going to go in with a paintbrush and add that fake blood on the inside here. And that just adds a lot of really lovely shine, a lot of texture, and it's going to drip really, really nicely as well if you want it to, if you add quite a bit. So we can put a little bit on the side here, get a good drip going on, and that leaves it looking really kind of gross and pretty natural looking. And so the biggest problem with the wax is that it is wax. It is not going to set as easily as the makeup will. You can do a layer of powder on top of this, but the wax is just going to kind of inherently be a little fragile. So this is not something that you would want Gosh, sorry, y'all. I keep on getting the hand out of the camera. This is not something that you're going to want to probably actually put on a hand if it's going to take a lot of use or abuse. This technique is really, really great for gashes across the face, any sort of abrasions on the face where it's just not going to get touched as much. You can do this same technique with liquid latex, and that's actually going to hold up a lot better on the hand. But I have another liquid latex technique that I wanted to show y'all, so I wanted to show y'all how the wax worked first. But what I do like about the wax is that it's really, because it's so flexible, it moves really, really naturally with your skin. So that is how you create a gash with wax. All right, so the last technique I'm going to show you is how to do a scab. Whoop, there we go. We're going to do a scab using liquid latex. And so as we think about scabs, we're going to think about how blood and wounds kind of dry and congeal on the skin. So when you get think about when you had a skinned knee or you fell and skinned the palms of your hands. When you abraded the skin, you get that kind of collection of blood that dries and cracks on the surface of the skin, and the scab is there to protect to protect your body as your body heals. And so when we're thinking about how we create a scab, we want to think about how we're adding that texture onto the body. And so we're going to be using things that you find in your kitchen. Yet again, a lot of special effects are things that you find in your kitchen to add texture. And so one of the most common things that people will use to add texture is going to be oatmeal. Oatmeal is a really great flexible texture agent that we can use to add some really kind of lumpy sort of texture to our scab. This is just instant oatmeal. The only oatmeal I had in my house was apple cinnamon. So all my scabs smell apple cinnamony right now, which is weird and delightful. If you wanted to add in kind of a finer texture, this is a stone cut oatmeal. So it has kind of these coarser, less flat grains here. And then you can also use things like coffee grounds. You can use rice, anything that is going to kind of mimic the texture that you want to add into that liquid latex. But here, I think I'm just going to use probably a combination of the two oatmeals to get our texture. So you're going to want your basic makeup kit as we've kind of played with here today. The other thing that you're going to need to do a scab is you're going to need a bottle of liquid latex. When you're using liquid latex, again, we want to be sure that whoever you are applying it to does not have a latex allergy. If they do have a latex allergy, there are alternatives that you can use, but they don't tend to be as effective. You can use white glue, like Elmer's glue is actually a relatively effective mimic of liquid latex, and it's very cheap and it's very easy to find. But the latex does work a little better. So if they do not have a latex allergy, using the latex is going to be your best bet. And so what we're going to do is we're going to first, I'm gonna do a scab. Let's do a scab right here. How much skin do I have left on my arm here? And so the first thing that I'm going to do is open up my latex. And the liquid latex, as me and Mia discovered last week, does not last forever. So if you don't use it a lot, just get the little small bottle. And so we're going to just, there we go. Do a nice thin layer of this where we're going to put our scab. And so the trick with the latex is that you have to give it drying time. And so to speed that up, I'm actually going to hit this with a hair dryer here just to get it to the point where it's tacky so I can start embedding in my, my oatmeal. So excuse the noise here just for a minute. All right, so now I'm going to take just a little sprinkle of my oatmeal. and press that into the latex. I promise this looks like something other than oatmeal on your arm once you're done. And then you're going to add another layer of latex on top of that. And that's going to embed that oatmeal into the first layer. All right, so same thing, I'm gonna hit it with a hairdryer just to dry that out a little more quickly. All right, how are we doing here? Yeah. And then I'm gonna add a last little sprinkle of this stone ground oatmeal on top. Press that in just to give it a little bit of a different texture. And you guessed it, one more layer of the liquid latex. You wanna make sure that all of your whatever, your oatmeal, your rice, your coffee grounds, whatever you're adding into is completely covered and encased by the latex, because next thing we're going to do is we are going to paint over this with our makeup. So we want to make sure that we're not going to accidentally release some of this texture that we're adding in. There we go. All right, I'm going to hit it with the dryer one more time, get that nice and dry so we can paint her up. All right, let's see how we're doing here. A little tacky, but I think it'll do for today. All right, so now you can see all of that oatmeal is nice and firmly embedded in this latex, and it gives us this really kind of rough sort of texture that is really reflective in this light, but there we are. And so now we're going to go in and use our powder brush. We're just going to pat a little bit of powder on that to give the makeup a little something extra to stick onto. There we go. And now we can go in and we can paint. So I'm just going to give this a very, very light brush with the foundation. We're not going to really do too much foundation work on it, but just to tone it down a little bit, especially as we get out towards the edges. And then I'm going to go in. I think I'm going to do this as kind of a gross burn scab thing. I'm going to go in with my, actually, let's start, kind of get some overall color. Start with the red. Like that. And now I want to get in with the red and the paintbrush and kind of get in all these little nooks and crannies from the oatmeal. Because what we're going to do is we're going to do kind of a dry brush technique on top of this with a darker red and some black and some brown. And that's going to really highlight this texture. So we want to make sure that we are completely covering up all of the latex color and all of that foundation. And so the trick with gore and wound makeup and makeup in general is that it takes practice and it's time consuming. Like this is not a quick and dirty process. What I'm doing here is actually really quick and dirty. So it's time consuming, it takes practice, And if this is something that you want to do for Halloween or you want to do for funsies, you just want to make sure that you're giving yourself enough time so that you are getting the application that you really, really want. All right, so once we have our red down, now I'm going to go in with my sponge, and I'm going to go in with this darker red, this kind of maroon, and I'm just going to dab that on top. And you can see how that's picking up a lot of the texture of that oatmeal, like so. And then it's leaving kind of the crevices, leaving those little dips and valleys of the brighter red underneath. And then I'll go in with this purple as well. We'll give it a little bit more of a dark texture around there. And then what I think is fun, is to actually take this dark purple and really kind of go in around the edges of that latex and add kind of a little bit of a shadow underneath that. And that just really helps the texture, again, kind of pop around those edges and makes it look just a little more disgusting, which is the goal of this sort of work. And we can tap that out and blend that out. I'm going with some yellow there around the edges as well. Yellow is honestly your BFF when you're doing special effects, bruising, wounds, and that sort of thing. It just adds a lot of really interesting depth to your cuts and your wounds and your abrasions. Just in the spirit of time, this is really quick and dirty, y'all. And then sometimes if I feel like I want a little darker texture on top of there, I can actually go in with my eyeshadow palette. And let's pull out some of these kind of darker brown brushes, darker brown eyeshadows with a little bit of a brush. And just add a little bit of texture on top of that as well. And kind of pull that out towards the sides.
Can you also, before we're done, can we see those at a distance?
Yes, that's a fantastic idea. Thank you. And then again, on something like this, just to make it look even more disgusting than it already is, I like to go in with my corn syrup based blood and just kind of give it a little bit of a shine. Do kind of a drip down there. Merge these two together. Like so. All right, so kind of ultra shiny underneath this light. Let me turn that down just a scooch. There we go. All right, so that's gross. That's gross. All right, and let me show you that distance shot that Mia asked for. All right, so from a very, very far distance, you lose a lot of the detail, but here we can start to see how that, especially how that gash is moving. I think seeing it from a distance here, I'd probably add a little more black on top of that scab just to help that texture pop out a little bit. There we go. All right, so we talked about bruises, which got lost under my scab a little bit, and we talked about gashes. And that is all we have time to do today. Oh, look, I got blood here too. Got blood everywhere. Again, I just want to encourage y'all to play. Make sure that you are playing safely. Make sure that you are only using ingestible blood on anything that's going to be ingested, and have a lot of fun. Oh, how do you do burns? Oh, burns. Burns are, I can't explain it really quickly. There's no way to show it really quickly. So with that, using the liquid latex, what you're going to do is you're going to choose where your burn is going to be. So if I wanted a burn kind of going across my hand here, I'm going to do a strip or a section of liquid latex, and I'm going to build that up over a series of 3 or 4 or 5 very thin layers. And as those layers are drying, I'm going to kind of manipulate my skin so that it dries in wrinkles like this. So if my skin is smooth when I apply it, I'm going to hold my skin like this so that it dries wrinkly. And then when it's dry and I release that latex, it's going to have kind of a wrinkled texture on top of the skin there. And as you build that up over 3 or 4 or 5 layers of latex, you'll get a really, really nice kind of a wrinkly burned effect with that liquid latex. And then what you can do is you go in, just like we did for our scab and just like we did for our gash, you're going to go in and you're going to paint over that with your foundation and your colors to get the burn effect that you want. What's really fun about doing it with the liquid latex is that you can actually peel down that latex skin that you just created and have that piece of skin kind of falling off your hand. And if you put a little bit of that fake blood underneath that little fold back skin, it looks like the skin is peeling away from your actual hand or wherever you've applied this burn, that because skin kind of flake, especially on a really heavy burn, the skin's going to flake off. So pulling the edges of that latex down and then adding the blood underneath will mimic that exposed raw skin underneath the burned skin on top. You're going to want to probably use a lot of, like we did here, we used a lot of black. You'll probably use a lot more depending on the extensiveness of your burn. But yeah, doing that layers of liquid latex and then peeling back those edges and getting that wrinkly texture by kind of holding your skin is going to get you a really great burn effect. All right, well, if there are no other questions, thank you so much for joining us, friends.